Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar today, Inclusive Leadership, Harnessing the Diversity of Thought. My name is Kat Duco, and I'm the Marketing and Business Development Manager at the Myers-Briggs company. I work alongside a team of key account managers to support our customers across the Asia-Pacific region. We're excited that we had such a great response for this topic with nearly 1,300 registrants. We do want this to be an interactive webinar, and I'll be assisting with questions and comments throughout. To participate, please use the questions box feature on your GoToWebinar side panel. For those of you who don't know who we are and what we do, the Myers-Briggs company is a mission-driven global organization with a 60-year history. Our mission is to inspire everyone to lead more successful and fulfilling lives. We work with organizations of all sizes and from all industry sectors to design and deliver development programs relating to teams, leadership, organizational development, coaching, and selection. With our range of assessments, you can achieve multiple business objectives for the entire talent lifecycle, from selecting the right talent, developing your people to enhance performance, and supporting career transitions. Our presenter today is Dr. Martin Boult, Senior Director of Professional Services and Psychologist at the Myers-Briggs company. Martin's role is pivotal in helping people respond to ever-changing work environments. He has experience partnering with organizations across the Asia-Pacific region and helping people to apply insights from research to areas including leadership development, executive coaching, team effectiveness, organizational change, virtual training solutions, and workplace well-being. He's also our lead assessment certification trainer. During this webinar, Martin will highlight key insights around inclusive leadership and why this vein of leadership development is a rising priority for organizations. And with that, I will turn you over to Martin.
Thank you, Kat. And indeed, welcome everyone who's joined our session today. As Kat said, it's obviously a topic of great interest and great that we've got so many people interested in the topic. And I'm hoping today that everyone gets something useful to take away immediately from the session, but also we've got some further thoughts of things you might want to tap into after our time today. I've just switched my camera on just so everyone knows that it's a real person here, not an avatar or some artificial intelligence. I won't leave it on for the course of our session because it can also be quite distracting for everyone as well. But just to maybe kick things off and really wanted to get everyone's involvement and thoughts on this. And you can share your responses to this now in the questions box. But what we're going to ask you to share is what is something about you? It could be your ideas, your perspective, a personality attribute or style, a work style, for example, something that you like to be recognized for or appreciated for in the workplace. And so what we'll ask you to do is just think about one thing, type that in the questions box. And we've got a sample of thoughts of what people like to be appreciated and recognised for. I'll invite Kat just to call out some of the things that have been shared. And keeping in mind that these could be things that you know about yourself, but maybe not everyone has seen or had a chance to recognise or show appreciation for you about that particular attribute. So Kat, how's it looking? What have we got coming through?
We've got quite a bit of participation, which is great. The screen keeps scrolling on me. So just to share a few, I mean, top of the list was inclusiveness. So I guess they're coming to the right webinar here. But also bringing people together, being empathetic, creative, having passion, use of technology, so some skills-based things as well, getting things done. There's a lot more pouring in as well, but that's a nice selection there. Oh, and Martin, I don't know if you muted
Excellent.
yourself.
Right. Well, first of all, thank you everyone for contributing. And I know, all right, let me turn my camera off. Is that work coming through, Kat?
Yes.
Great. I think good old challenges of internet at the moment. We might find that video is taxing on the audio. So firstly, thank you everyone for sharing thoughts there. And yeah, great, Kat, that you're able to get quite a wide selection because there's obviously quite a range of things that people bring to our professional roles and that we value being recognised for. So maybe just to focus in on what we'll work through in this session, and I'll start with, we'll look at a lens for today around the concepts of inclusion and diversity, why that's in fact important, what the benefits are for having an inclusive workplace, the role of leaders in inclusive workplaces, both creating and maintaining them, and also to look at what we consider 5 challenges that we've identified that leaders face when they're either trying to or learning how to practice inclusion and building creating inclusive work environments. And finally, to share with you some ways that we've found effective for helping leaders develop an inclusive approach with the people that they're leading, so that it leads to meaningful change. So today's lens for inclusion and diversity, and these are words that are used quite a lot. There's a lot of discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace around the world, and that's got a lot to do with the fact that the workplace is becoming more diverse, both in age, ethnicity, and many other factors. Our lens for inclusion, though, is very much looking at it through the lens of diversity of thought. So diverse employees can refer to any number of characteristics in ways we might distinguish or differentiate people. But what we're going to focus on today in this session is looking at diversity of thought. And the reason we're looking at this is it's often easily overlooked. It's not obvious to have diverse thinking approaches. And diversity of thought is about recognizing that people are diverse from one another in multiple ways that shape their thinking. So there is diversity of thought around different thinking approaches or perspectives that people have when they look at the world or situations. There's diversity around the experiences and background that people have, that's part of their history that shapes what they do and how they operate. There's diversity of work styles with respect to communication preferences, decision-making, and even how people prefer to lead or be led. There's differences in personality styles and types. And of course, values will also shape diversity of thought as well. Now, these are the sorts of things that, with our image of the iceberg, they're not easily seen. And many of these elements of diverse ways of thinking sit below the waterline, but they certainly have a role in influencing how people behave. And maybe just for everyone to reflect privately for a moment, how much and how often are you asked to share your perspectives and feel you are valued for individual and unique contributions you make around your ideas or the things that you find motivating or your preferred ways of working, or indeed being consulted based on the different personality preferences that you bring and the strengths that come with that. So a moment ago when I was asking everyone to share what is something about your ideas or personality type or work style that you like to be appreciated and recognized for, these are things that we're aware of, but it's not always obvious to others that we might be value being appreciated for those different aspects of who we are. And we know that people of different personality types, both from our research and experience of using different personality models and assessments, want to be recognized for different things, not only for the work tasks they might accomplish, but for what they bring to the table, what they bring as a person to their work roles. And for those who might have some familiarity with the model of personality, one that we use quite a lot is the Myers-Briggs type indicator personality framework. And different personality types or preferences value different things when they're being recognized or involved. So people on the MBTI who report with preferences for intuition and thinking will often describe that they like building systems and executing projects in logical and effective ways. And so they often want to be recognized for their competence in doing that. People with a different set of preferences, sensing and thinking, will often report that they value bringing a bottom line or return on investment approach to working on things. And they like to be appreciated for keeping things grounded and data driven. People with the preferences for sensing and feeling will often report that they like to find practical ways of helping people, be it customers or people that they work with, and they want to be valued for the practical support that they bring to others. And finally, people with preferences for intuition and feeling love working with organisations that align closely with their personal values, and they will often value being recognised for staying true to those values in the workplace. Now you can see out of those 4 examples there is no better or worse or right way to be appreciated or recognised or included, but there are clearly different needs that aren't always obvious just from how someone approaches their work. So what is inclusion? So when we talk about inclusion today, we're talking about inclusion of diversity of thought. So inclusion is being aware of giving voice to, understanding and integrating diversity of thought in our work lives, and particularly with the people that we're working with. An inclusive person or team or organisation is committed to creating an environment where all members feel they're inspired and encouraged to bring their workplace their uniqueness of diversity of thought, or that they recognise that there's no one way of thinking that's more valued than others. So it brings to bear what might be the benefits of having inclusive workplaces. Well, there's 2 ways that it's been looked at through various research groups. Starting on the individual employee front, some interesting research by Gartner found that only 31% of employees agree that their leaders promote an inclusive team environment. So maybe just think about that for a moment. Only 31% experience that. Only 27% of employees feel that their organisation informs them of opportunities to promote inclusion in their day-to-day work. So it seems like it's not clearly on the radar at an individual level. When we look at the organisational research, only 36% of diversity and inclusion leaders report that their organisation has been effective in the very initiatives that they're trying to lead. And what struck me was a staggering 80% of organisations rate themselves as ineffective at developing a diverse and inclusive leadership bench strength. So there's a lot of work that really needs to be done here. And despite an awareness or maybe best efforts, it appears from this research there's a long way to go in building the inclusiveness in organisations. So again, here's another chance for everyone to get involved. And again, we'd love to see what comes out of your own experiences here about inclusion. So we're going to launch a poll in a few seconds. And the question here is, how would you say your organisation is doing in moving the needle on inclusion? How progressed or evolved is your organisation in the inclusion state? So the options you'll have to choose from is, A, I'm not aware of a dedicated focus or goal for inclusion in my organisation. B, inclusion is an accepted concept, but there isn't a clear strategy in our organisation. We have made efforts to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion, but haven't reached our goals in our organisation. And the final option is, we have a coordinated strategy, roles, and an inclusive organisation. So I might invite Kat, if you wanted to launch that poll, and we'll give everyone a few minutes, or a few moments, I should say, just to get their responses in. And appreciate there's only sort of 4 levels of response here. So you might find that your particular experience in the organisation sits between some of these options, but let's see what's coming through from your own experience. So Kat, when you think we've got some answers in, it'd be great to see what's come up.
Sure. So I'll go ahead and close it out. We have the majority have come through and voted. And I'll just go ahead and share the results here. So it looks like most of us are lying in the middle too. So it might be an accepted concept, but perhaps not a formal strategy in place. Or they're making efforts to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion, but haven't yet reached their goals.
Excellent. But so again, thanks again, everyone, for participating and sharing. And in some ways, it's reassuring that there's not many responding to the first option. I am not aware of a dedicated focus on inclusion. So it sounds like most organisations have got some awareness of it. But it also struck me there that what we saw in your responses is sort of option D, we have a coordinated strategy and roles for inclusion. That still is not clearly in the majority of organisations. So developing inclusive workplaces is key to meeting the increasingly diverse needs of customers and stakeholders and employees. Indeed, in a world where many organisations are reaching customer markets that sit way beyond their local positions, and for those who are doing more online delivery of their services and products, that's going to increase the diversity even further. Also, unlocking the business benefits of a diverse workforce, how businesses can benefit and thrive by including diversity of thought, and realizing the people benefits of inclusive workplace cultures where individual and collective diversity of employees can thrive, and also how that might attract people you would like or want working with you or in your organization because of the reputation you have for being inclusive. But when we look at what are some of the business outcomes of more inclusive organizations, we sampled a number of research studies that looked at inclusive workplaces. And here is an example of some of the highlights. So first of all, from the Chief Executive for Corporate Purpose Research, they found that inclusive workplaces or organizations were 70% higher in their growth and likely to capture new markets. McKinsey found that inclusive workplaces reported 36% better profitability than less inclusive workplaces. Cloverpop identified that decisions were better in organizations that were more inclusive, and the Boston Consulting Group also highlighted the benefits for innovation, that with more diversity and inclusion in an organization, innovation increases compared to industry peers. So what are the people outcomes when people feel included at work? Because we've just looked at the business benefits, but of course business is made up of people. And employees who work for inclusive teams and organizations report feeling that they're treated respectfully and fairly. That means that they feel safe and they are more likely to bring their whole self to work. They also leads people to feeling like they belong and they're committed because their contribution is accepted and valued. And people working in inclusive workplaces report that they feel a greater sense of purpose in their work because what they're doing is going beyond completing a task. It also means that what they're doing is connected to a higher purpose and meaning for them. And we do know and have seen throughout recent times with the COVID pandemic that having a clear purpose in a work role has helped people weather some of the challenges or frustrations or the disruption that's come with working in a COVID environment. And also, people who working in inclusive work environments will often feel quite confident and inspired to contribute and share their perspectives. So there are benefits all around, not just for the individual, but for the organisation and the people that are working together. And there's no surprise, this is how people feel when they work in inclusive workplaces. And maybe to tap into some recent research that myself and colleagues have been working on for the last 5 years. And this is where our research looking at trying to discover what are the things that have an impact on people's sense of well-being in the workplace. And what we actually found when we look at well-being through these 6 factors, well-being comprises the kind of relationships that we have at work, the level of meaning and purpose a person has in their work, the sense of accomplishment they have, how engaged they are with their work, the frequency of positive emotions they experience in comparison to the frequency of negative emotions. And from our latest research in the last 18 months, we particularly paid attention to the role of the leader and employee relationship and its impact on well-being of employees. And what we found is that when the leader and employee relationship is gauged as negative, there is lower employee work satisfaction, and also it impacts on the employee's well-being. In contrast, when the leader and employee relationship is positive, we find that employees report high levels of satisfaction and also high levels of well-being. And this is probably something not to gloss over, because our wider research from the 5 years also found that when people report high levels of well-being, it contributes to their loyalty in their organisation. They're more likely to be more committed to their work and their organisation, and they're also likely to report positive mental and physical benefits of that well-being, not just at work, but outside of work as well. So this highlights that leaders do play a very central role in the experience of how included people feel in workplaces. So inclusive workplaces are all about keeping individuals and people and their differences and diversity of thought front and center. So to truly achieve inclusive workplaces, we have to turn our attention then to the leaders. And again, from our research and work with organisations trying to foster inclusivity, when it comes to inclusion initiatives, we found that companies cannot just simply launch programs and expect results, that it's going to automatically lead to inclusive behaviour or outcomes. A strong focus on implementation is needed, just like any other business priority. In fact, for many client organisations, I often say if you set up a new computer system that you wanted everyone to be using in your business, but simply said, there it is, and left it for people to work out, what's the likelihood that not only would people start using it, but know how to use it in effective ways? It's no difference with inclusion initiatives. They require the same level of care and attention and commitment as any other initiative. And specifically, the success of each of these initiatives requires commitment from leaders in the organisation. And as Boston Consulting Group found, that leaders must build a clear case for change in determining a company's current performance in terms of diversity and communicating the ways that a more diverse workforce and leadership team will lead to better performance. And leaders, not vision or mission statements, are the things that create inclusive environments. So even when top level leaders espouse a commitment to inclusion, Boston Consulting Group found that managers and frontline leaders are actually the ones that have the most direct impact or influence on day-to-day experience of inclusion by employees. So it's these frontline managers, not just the senior ones, that are the most immediate role models for employees about what it means to be inclusive. And leaders at all levels can make or break commitments to inclusion that an organisation might be trying to foster. So let's think about the impact of the direct managers, the people that spend the most time with employees, leading and guiding them. So employees working under a less than committed direct manager, that is less than committed to inclusion, feel less likely to be welcomed and feel included at work. And so we touched on what some of the impacts of that might mean if people don't feel included at work. Employees whose direct managers aren't committed to diversity and inclusion are 2 times as likely to feel excluded at work. And of course, the flow-on effects of people feeling excluded is quite significant when you look at contributions and discretionary effort. And another interesting piece from the Boston Consulting Group's research is employees are 3 times more likely to seek employment elsewhere than employees of companies that have consistent leadership engagement. And that, I guess, for me is also quite telling, as there's a growing awareness and now even more signs that at different parts in the world, as the businesses start to re-emerge from full remote working and coming out of the crisis phase of the pandemic, that there is a real risk of people leaving organisations or resigning from organisations because of new insights they've got during that time through the initial stages of the pandemic. So commitment might be particularly waning in organisations where there is low levels of inclusion experienced by employees. So inclusive leadership is a critical capability for all leaders. And most leaders that we speak to realise this or recognise that. Leaders themselves now understand that in today's business environment, companies must achieve diversity if they want to acquire and retain the best people for their organisation, but also to have people feeling engaged and contributing to business performance. However, inclusion of individual and collective diversity, it's not a given, it's not automatic. It actually requires inclusive leadership capabilities where leaders are equipped with it to leverage diverse thinking, personality styles, and ways of looking at ideas and values through a range of lenses. And that was articulated in a recent article by the Harvard Business Review. But just saying that we need to be or want to be more inclusive is not going to automatically create that outcome. Regardless of the organisational vision for inclusion or a leader's professed commitment to inclusion, it's not guaranteed just by simply talking about it. Not all leaders have inclusive approaches top of mind, and many have not even undertaken professional leadership development that helps them build or develop that inclusive approach to leadership. So as I mentioned earlier, we've identified through our work with a range of organisations that there are 5 common challenges leaders face in practicing inclusion and creating inclusive work environments, even if they recognise it's important to do that. And as we go through these 5 challenges, I'll also show you some ways that leaders can be assisted to work within the environment that they might find challenging. So we know inclusion matters, we know leaders are key, and we also have a sense that it isn't automatically developed, inclusive leadership. It isn't a given that all leaders are inclusive leaders, even when they want to be. So why is that? Well, here's one of the first challenges: our predispositions and our blind spots, aka our susceptibilities that every leader and every person has that might get in the road of demonstrating inclusion in the workplace. So leaders have a series of implicit associations and biases formed from their experiences, the environment that they currently operate in, and also linked to their underlying personality traits and preferences. These lead to favouring sameness or favouring ease of getting things done. And that comes through in decisions that leaders make about who they select or how they lead or guide project teams, the kind of team protocols or norms, and the accepted ways leaders allow for work to get done. And an example where that might play out, that particular favouring of sameness, is the example where a leader needs to bring together a group of people to work on a project. And picking a project or a project leader who is like the leader themselves or communicates in a way that the leader likes, just because it might feel like it's going to be faster or easier, is an example where these implicit biases can actually lead to a negative outcome or the outcome that wasn't expected. So these biases can be conscious. We can build an awareness of our underlying biases, but for the most part, they're often unconscious. And they inadvertently lead to the exclusion of others. Even when leaders are not intending that, it can be just an outcome that flows from it. The other challenge we've identified is the diversity of thought challenge, and that is diversity of thought is complex. As I mentioned earlier, it's not made up of one thing. There is diversity of perspective and work style and personality style. So it's difficult for leaders to know these differences as represented by those on their teams. In fact, a lot of it is guesswork unless a leader takes time to learn about the people they're leading. And what we've actually seen is building a greater awareness of the leader's personality needs and preferences and those that they lead can help leaders build that awareness of diversity of thought. And we've seen that obviously understanding the different needs and styles that each personality brings adds a lot to raising the awareness of how people prefer to communicate in different ways, how they prefer to work in different ways effectively. What motivates one person may not motivate another member of the team. What might be signs or triggers for stress that differ across different personality types, and how we expect to lead or be led is also shaped by our underlying personality preferences. And when trying to put together new programs around inclusion, the different reactions to change will also be shaped by individual personality needs. So the third challenge we've identified is the set of skills required for leaders to foster and develop an inclusive leadership workspace. So inclusion is not just a strategic priority, it's also a set of skills and mindset of how to harness differences and use that in a constructive way. Inclusive leadership is an increasingly sought after leadership skill. As I mentioned earlier, we're now finding that leaders are expected to work with and build on the strengths of very diverse groups of people, be it in a project team or across a whole organisation. And an often missing piece of one's leadership development is the cultivation of skills needed to advance the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Only 1 in 3 organisations from some research in 2021 are presently designing a strategy that involves inclusive development of leaders. So there's a real opportunity here to add into or incorporate into developing leaders ways to support them in being inclusive with the people they're leading. And how we behave has an impact, but so does how we perceive ourselves and how we are perceived by others. So the leadership self-perception or skill trap is another challenge that all leaders face. When we start with self-perception, some interesting research by Harvard found that 2 out of 3 leaders hold an inaccurate view about their own inclusive leadership capabilities. So 2 out of 3 is a pretty high rate of leaders not being aware of their approach to inclusion. And when we look at how others perceive the leaders, be it their staff and peers, 33% of leaders believe they are more inclusive than they are perceived by those around them. And this for me presented an interesting one because I think the intent of leaders to be inclusive is there, but how it's landing with the people who they're trying to include seems at odds with what their underlying intent is. And when we look at the actual capability of leaders and their capacity to be inclusive, we found that 33% of leaders lack confidence in their inclusive leadership capability, and as a result, do less than they could to actively guide others and challenge the status quo. So when we think about the awareness of leaders, that becomes an important place to begin, the self-perception and the perceptions others have. And indeed, it appears from these kind of studies that there are leadership blind spots that can be brought to the awareness of leaders if they're willing to explore and build their self-awareness and also learn how they are perceived by others. And in actual fact, I've known for many years working with leaders, without that awareness of those blind spots, it's like flying a plane or sailing a ship at night without any lights or navigational instruments. It's a bit like flying blind in a leadership role. And finally, the 5th challenge that can be a frustration or a hindrance on leaders being inclusive, and that is organisational constraints. So we know that leaders don't operate in a vacuum. They operate within real constraints enforced by deep organisational processes or systems or reward structures, or indeed the underlying organisational culture. And these organisational processes are not designed usually to support inclusion. In fact, they're often designed to lead to other outcomes that a business might be initially focusing on, but less aware of how they might impinge on inclusive behaviours. An example of this might be that organisations who prize efficiency, rapid decision-making, quick actions, and internal competition, all of these go to an organisational workplace and dynamic that works against inclusion and diversity. And I am conscious of there are some very public leaders who have promoted making quick choices and fast and expedient choices to get things done. And sometimes they're lauded as successes, but if you look behind the curtain, there's often a wake of people who felt like they didn't have a significant role or part to play in those environments. So developing inclusive leadership, how do we actually do something to address the gap, but also work with some of the things that might get in the road of being inclusive? And it's good to know there are positive things that at an individual and an organisational we can do to improve inclusion and nurture diversity of thought in leadership. Starting with the first recommendation that all leaders need to be involved in developing and supporting inclusive approaches in the workplace. If we don't offer inclusive leadership development for all leaders, not just the senior level, we're likely to be taking big risks assuming that simply vision and mission statements about inclusion will actually land in the daily reality of people across the organisation. So the first thing to look at from your organisation if you're wanting to build an inclusive capability is create a development plan that spans all leaders across all levels. And why? Inclusive leadership isn't just an ideal or a company vision. It's something that actually happens through the behaviour and interaction on a day-to-day basis. And whilst the most senior leaders set the vision and the expectations and the tone of what it means to have an inclusive leadership or inclusive workplace, it's actually the frontline leaders who are going to broker the day-to-day employee experience of whether inclusion is part and parcel of working in that environment. And I'm sure everyone's encountered situations where there was an espoused vision or norm or cultural expectation by the senior level of an organisation, but it doesn't flow down into the day-to-day work, or in worse still, people actually behave in ways opposite to that, and the level of distrust or cynicism that can flow from that. So frontline leaders become crucial in helping create the inclusive environment at all levels. And recommendation number 2, leaders need to know what are the capabilities that are important for fostering inclusion. Inclusive leadership doesn't occur automatically. It is bolstered by exposure to challenging preconceived notions and to overcoming unconscious biases. This means that inclusive leadership can be developed. So what we've found is there are specific competencies that inclusive leaders have and exercise in their work roles. So through our consulting work with client organisations, the Myers-Briggs company has spent decades helping people better understand what makes them unique and diverse from a personality point of view, from an interpersonal disposition, from career interests, right through to underlying motivations, and how to harness that diversity in the context of teams and also having a diverse leadership bench. And we've discovered that no matter how diverse a team or a leadership bench is, inclusive teams and organisations all need to do some work to further foster inclusiveness in the workplace. So what are some of the competencies that are important for this? You can see on screen from our work and research, we've identified 8 core competencies that leaders need to be not only aware of, but to exercise in their leadership. And in brief summary, it starts with humility, moving to curiosity, and then on to openness of difference, finding ways where they can constructively leverage difference, exercising empathy and perspective taking, having courage to seek out alternate ways of looking at situations or challenging the status quo, being flexible and adapting beliefs and behaviours, and also self-awareness, being aware of what they know out of these competencies they can comfortably exercise and which ones come with more stretch. So how do we actually develop these? Well, our third recommendation is start with looking at what each of your leaders is capable and comfortable developing and exercising in inclusive leadership. And this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. There is not one set of skills that works or is necessary or equally developed in leaders. We do know that leaders engage in development when they are in the driver's seat of their development. And the starting point for that is to allow for self-evaluation that can help leaders pick their starting point. So leaders want to know and leverage their strengths and what they already do well. Leaders also want to be informed of ways to identify their personal challenges and what they might be inadvertently overlooking or what they might do too much of. So we found that leveraging proven assessments, because they reveal aspects that are objective for each leader, we may not know through self-evaluation only. So including how we come across to others is of equal importance in helping leaders build these competencies. So we've been in the business of developing self-awareness and helping people develop self-awareness, particularly leaders, for many decades now. But the latest method and tool that we put together is a personalized inclusive leadership development program, which leverages and starts with the diagnostic tool for evaluating one's inclusive leadership quotient. And here you can see a sample of some of the question items linking to leadership behaviours that leaders are invited to evaluate themselves on to build that awareness. And these are the behaviours and approaches that translate into inclusive leadership. So each leader undertaking this kind of development starts with their own assessment. What's a strength or a stretch for them? And as they build awareness of what their strengths and stretches are, it helps them map those back to the 8 competencies that I was mentioning earlier. So this is the start of our inclusive leadership development program, really bringing that self-awareness front of mind. And the same assessment method can be used after the leadership development program to see what progress has been made. So individualized starting points help promote meaningful change. Simply assuming leaders are all at the same level or capability around inclusion can be quite misleading and also lead to development that either completely misses the mark or worse still disengages leaders from that development. So developing inclusive leadership means aligning the development activities and methods with each leader's set of strengths and their development stretches. So one leader might have strengths in the competencies of courage and curiosity, but they've also identified they have to further work on or develop their flexibility and empathy. Yet another leader might have identified that empathy and courage are their underlying strengths, but they need to develop in the areas of self-awareness and leveraging differences. And yet another example might be a leader who's very comfortable and confident exercising humility and openness, but needs to do some further work on empathy and curiosity. So we found that giving that flexibility for leaders to pinpoint their strengths and stretches is one of the most important ways of them developing their inclusive leadership. So just to bring it to a bit of a summary, and then I'm sure we'll have some time for some Q&A and some extra pieces of information that Kat can share with you beyond our session today. But what we really looked at in our time together is inclusive workplaces give businesses and people beneficial outcomes. The leader and employee relationship is critical. How employees experience their leader is a key part of it. And leaders are central to building inclusivity with individuals and teams. It doesn't happen just in a spontaneous way. Inclusive leadership skills are not automatic. They take conscious thought, awareness, and also practice to develop. And there are notable challenges leaders face if they're going to try and cultivate or build a more inclusive leadership approach. So knowing what is the environment and context the leader is trying to develop these in, and how they're going to either be supported or hindered, are crucial in getting the outcomes for inclusive leadership. Also, it can be developed if leaders tap into relevant competencies supporting inclusive leadership and begin with their individualized starting points, not a one-size-fits-all. And finally, leveraging today's recommendations and what has worked for others is a place where any one of us can start. So please reach out to partners for support. And we often find that as part of our leadership programs in particular, having the leaders who are participating pair up or work in peer support groups is another useful way of leveraging difference and diversity in their learning with each other that they can then take back to their work with their teams or in the organisation. So hopefully that gives everyone some key insights or some top of mind thoughts that you can start to consider or apply, or even seek us out for more information. I might at this point now hand over to Kat, who's got a few more points, and I guess Kat will probably also have some time for some questions.
Yes, thank you, Martin. We will address questions momentarily, so please feel free to submit those through the questions box. And while we wait for those to come through, I'll just quickly share a few of our solutions leveraging Myers-Briggs insights, which are also highlighted on our website. One option is to become accredited in the MBTI, which will qualify you to assess personality differences and provide you with practical tools to improve communication, reduce conflict, manage stress, and help teams across your organization to work better together. Our virtual MBTI certification course runs regularly in a couple different time zones, and it has been booking up quickly. So I've highlighted our remaining 2021 programs on the screen, and also just want to note that we have two virtual programs in December on the dates on the screen. One that's going to be delivered in English and the other in Cantonese. But for any of our programs, please feel free to reach out to our team with questions, or you can visit our website to enroll. If the public program dates don't work for you and you have a group of at least 4 or more people in your organization who want to undergo MBTI certification training, I do want to note we can run an in-house course as well on your preferred dates. So just contact us for help with that. Another option is to explore our virtual workshops that are facilitated by our expert consultants. It's a great way to bring MBTI insights to your leaders and teams with focused applications that can lead to lasting behavioral change. So as highlighted in this webinar, one of our virtual courses is the Inclusive Leadership Workshop, which encompasses 3 modules that can be delivered in one day or in bite-sized chunks across multiple days. During the workshops, leaders will learn the behaviors and skills needed to drive a culture of inclusion and enhance performance. Your leaders will gain an understanding about diversity of thought and work through the core competency model for practicing inclusion, which Martin shared earlier in the webinar, in order to build self-awareness and to leverage diversity in their teams. We also have short, focused virtual team development workshops that can keep your employees engaged through personality insights and practical application. During these workshops, each participant receives group feedback from our expert consultants so that they can find out their Myers-Briggs personality type and understand and appreciate differences in others. There are additional team workshop modules as well for enhancing communication, managing change, and building resilience, which are all essential skills at the moment. I do want to add that with both the Inclusive Leadership Workshop and the MBTI Essentials series, although we highlight them as virtual workshops, we can deliver these in person as well, of course, as government restrictions allow. And finally, we do understand that each team, whether it's a leadership team or a team of individual contributors, is made up of a diverse group of individuals, and therefore the strengths and challenges of each team can be unique. So if you need support with tackling the specific needs of your teams, we can discuss options for customized development programs. And for that, just contact us if you'd like to schedule a free consultation with Martin or another one of our expert consultants. Okay, so now we'll turn to questions, and there have been a lot of questions that have come through. With the time remaining, I think we can at least get through a few of them. The first one that's been it's come through a few times from several of you is one I'll take the lead on, Martin. But the question is, will we get the slides from today? And so I just want to let everybody know we will be following up with all the attendees to provide the recording and notes from today's webinar, along with a report on the inclusion delusion, which shares research on the importance of inclusive leadership and why leaders aren't as inclusive as they think they are. So please keep an eye out for that email. That should arrive in your inbox in the next couple of business days. And another question that's come through, I'll pass it to you, Martin, is how can you get senior leaders on board with the importance of inclusivity to the business?
Very good question, in as much that that's where I think any work on inclusive leadership needs to start, at the very senior leader end. So I think that the first thing is, within an organization, depending on its size, there'll be what I would call canaries in the cage warning signs. So when we start to see people leaving the organization that you'd otherwise want to retain, when we see people not contributing to their full capacity within a project or a team meeting, or when we have, say, other metrics from employee staff surveys that directly ask about inclusion, these are the kind of things that become important to highlight or point out to senior leaders, that there's something going on that's directly impacting on the level of inclusion and could in fact be resulting in exclusion. So we found that it needs to be a combination of metrics, if there are formal measures of it as by way of survey, but it does also need to be lined up with qualitative information and experiences that people either share or observe about behaviour that doesn't support inclusion. And putting that in front of senior leaders, and also not only what is the business impact, but what is the impact to reputation for the organisation and indeed the leadership group, if it's not viewed as an inclusive workplace. I found that kind of becomes an important motivator for senior leaders to want to address or do something about it. I think the good news is the majority of senior leaders want to establish an inclusive leadership culture or an inclusive workplace. And so even just letting them know that people are not experiencing that way can be a good place to start in getting their attention or their interest to do something about it.
Great, thanks, Martin. And just a clarifying point, since we're on the topic of different levels of leadership, earlier in your presentation, you were speaking about direct leaders, and there was a question that came through about that, to clarify what exactly are direct leaders.
Okay, sure, yeah. So when we're referring to that, it's the manager, the team leader, the supervisor, the person who has day-to-day, week-to-week interaction with a group of people, be it a team or a department, as opposed to a manager or a leader who sits one or two steps up or away from the people involved. So what we're really saying is, don't leave your inclusive leadership development initiatives at just very senior levels or only certain leaders of an organization. It really needs to be part of what all leaders are able to demonstrate and do. And so direct leaders are those that interact with employees on that, as I said, it may not be face-to-face, but certainly person-to-person level, as opposed to steps removed.
Great, thanks for clarifying that, Martin. I think we can get at least one more question in here. So what are the best ways of helping leaders develop the inclusive competencies, particularly considering that 33% of leaders overestimate how inclusive they are?
Yeah, so I think that first part is the overestimating is helping leaders get a real gauge on what is not only their own personal view of how inclusive they are, but how other people who they lead or interact with experience their approach to inclusion. So as I mentioned, we've got some objective measures of inclusive leadership behaviours that we've been using to help leaders raise that awareness. Once they have an awareness of what they're doing that either helps them be inclusive, but also what they might be missing or overlooking, then it is really pinpointing what are the behaviours again, within role and on a day-to-day level that they can switch to, that they can start to build on. And I've often found if leaders are up for it, and courage is one of the competencies in the inclusive leadership framework, the courage to share with the people that they're leading, here are some things I've learned about myself through this inclusive leadership program and the evaluation. Here are the things you'll see me that I'm going to be wanting to improve or work on, and I'm going to check in with you to ask how am I progressing. And I think that's when leaders see that the concepts and the competencies and the words actually land on the ground with their actual leadership work. And I think the more inclusive a leader is, I've had many leaders say to me, that's when their staff start to be more open with them. It's usually the leaders that either deliberately or inadvertently demonstrate exclusion, where they won't get that sort of ongoing feedback from people they work with. So even just trying to foster inclusive approaches can lead to that ways of helping leaders get better at those competencies.
Great, thanks so much, Martin. I know we are coming up against our time here. So I just want to note there are lots of questions that came through. Thank you all for your participation today. If we didn't get to your question now, we'll be sure to follow up with you individually to make sure that your question's addressed. And that goes for if you think of a question later, please do feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to address your questions or schedule a call to connect. And yeah, I just want to say thank you again to everybody for attending, and Martin for your presentation.
Great, thanks Kat, and thank you for everyone who joined today.
Thanks everyone.